Carter was not at the site when the step was found. He arrived the next morning to a crew that had spent the night barely sleeping, carefully clearing sand from what was now unmistakably a staircase, cut deep into the living rock of the valley floor, descending at a precise angle into the earth. By the time Carter knelt at the edge and looked down, 12 steps had been cleared. At the bottom, partially visible beneath the remaining debris, was the upper section of a plastered doorway. And on that doorway were seals. Ancient Egyptian necropolis seals. The mark of the priests who guarded this valley. The mark that meant this was closed by sacred hands, and what lies beyond was placed here by the will of eternity. Carter later wrote that it was the most extraordinary moment of his life, standing at the top of those stairs, looking down at a sealed door that had not been touched in over 3,000 years. He felt something that archaeologists rarely allow themselves to feel publicly. He felt the presence of time itself, compressed into a single threshold. He did something remarkable then. He stopped. He could have broken through immediately. No law, no authority. No physical barrier prevented him from descending those final steps and pushing through that door in the next hour. Instead, he ordered his team to refill the staircase with sand, post guards, and send a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England. The telegram read, "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations." Carnarvon arrived on November 23rd. On the 24th, the staircase was cleared again, all 16 steps now fully exposed. The sealed doorway stood complete before them, and there, in the lower portion of the plaster, Carter noticed something that briefly tightened his throat. Evidence of resealing. The tomb had been entered in antiquity. Twice, it appeared, and closed again. His hands read the surface the way a doctor reads a patient. The original seals of the necropolis priests were intact across most of the door, but the patches of resealing told him that robbers had been here, perhaps 3,000 years ago, perhaps within decades of the burial itself. What had they taken? How much remained? On November 26, 1922, with Carnarvon standing beside him, Carter made a small breach in the upper left corner of the doorway. He inserted an iron rod and felt nothing. No obstruction, no collapse of rubble behind the door. A void. He lit a candle and held it to the hole, testing for foul gases that could ignite or suffocate. The flame bent slightly, air moving from inside the sealed chamber. 3,000-year-old air pressing gently against the candle, as if exhaling for the first time. Carter widened the hole enough to insert an electric torch. He pressed his face to the opening and looked inside. What he saw paralyzed him. Carnarvon, standing just behind him, could not contain himself. "Can you see anything?" he asked. Carter's response entered history. "Yes, wonderful things." The beam of his torch cut through 3 millennia of darkness and landed on gold. Gold everywhere, gleaming as if it had been polished that morning, untouched by time, sealed in a chamber where no light had reached since the reign of Rameses the Great. Gilded animal couches with heads of fantastic creatures reared toward the ceiling, alabaster vases, painted wooden chests, dismantled chariots stacked against the walls, flowers placed in offering, dried now, fragile as paper, but still holding their original shape, left by hands that had grieved a young king and believed that beauty could survive death. The air inside that chamber was the same air breathed by the priests who sealed it. When the full excavation began, the scale of what had been preserved became almost incomprehensible. The tomb contained over 5,000 individual objects, a number that took Carter's team nearly a decade to fully catalog, photograph, and remove with the care that such artifacts demanded. Each object was treated as a sentence in a document that had waited 3,000 years to be read. And at the center of it all, past the antechamber, past the treasury, past the annex, was the burial chamber itself. 4 gilded shrines, nested inside each other like Russian dolls, filled the room almost completely. Inside the innermost shrine was a stone sarcophagus. Inside the sarcophagus were 3 coffins, each nested within the last. The outermost 2 were gilded wood. The innermost And this stopped every person in that chamber when it was finally revealed in February 1925, was solid gold. A coffin of pure gold, weighing over 110 kilograms, shaped in the form of a young man with his arms crossed over his chest, holding the crook and the flail, the symbols of Egyptian kingship. Inside that golden shell, wrapped in linen that crumbled at the first touch of air, lay Tutankhamun. His face was covered by the mask. The burial mask of Tutankhamun, now the most recognized artifact in human history, is made of solid gold inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, obsidian, turquoise, and colored glass. It weighs over 10 kilograms. The face it depicts is serene, young, and specific, not idealized beyond recognition, but particular, individual. A real face rendered in gold by craftsmen who had actually seen this boy and worked their grief into metal. When Carter lifted that mask for the first time, he was holding the face of a 19-year-old king who had been placed in darkness when the world was young. The discovery shook the planet. In a world still raw from the First World War, still navigating the fractures of modernity, still questioning what endured and what was lost, the intact tomb of an ancient pharaoh arrived like a message from a depth of time so vast it reordered perspective. Newspapers across every continent ran the story for weeks. Tutmania swept through fashion, architecture, film, and art. The geometric motifs of Egyptian design flooded the Art Deco movement. Women wore scarab brooches. Buildings were designed with lotus columns. A civilization that had been dust became, suddenly, astonishingly present. But the deeper resonance was not about gold or fashion or spectacle. It was about what the tomb revealed through its very smallness. Tutankhamun was not the greatest pharaoh. He was not the most powerful, the most celebrated, or the most consequential. He ruled for approximately 10 years, was managed by advisors, was erased from official records, and died before he could define himself fully. In purely historical terms, dozens of pharaohs outrank him in significance. And yet he is the one we know. He is the one whose face we recognize, whose name every schoolchild can pronounce, whose gold fills entire museum wings. He survived not because he was great, but because he was forgotten. Because his tomb was too small, too hidden, too covered over by the debris of other men's ambitions to attract the robbers who stripped every other royal burial in the valley down to bare stone. His obscurity was his salvation. There is something in that truth that extends far beyond Egypt, far beyond archaeology, far beyond the dry language of historical analysis. Civilizations pour their greatest energy into monuments meant to last forever. Pyramids, temples, inscriptions carved a meter deep into granite. And most of those monuments were found empty, stripped, erased by the very passage of time they were designed to survive. But a rushed burial, a small tomb, a boy king deemed unimportant enough to forget, that endured. Whole, intact, breathing. History preserves what it chooses, and its choices are rarely the ones the powerful intended. Tutankhamun slept for 3,000 years beneath the feet of conquerors who never knew his name. He woke to a world that had not yet learned, even in 1922, that the next war would be larger and more devastating than the last. He woke into electricity and cinema and the early tremors of a globalized civilization. He woke into a species still struggling, as it had always struggled, to understand what it means to live, to rule, to be remembered. The boy who was given everything and lost it before he could use it. The king who outlasted the kings who erased him. The face behind the gold mask still watching. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of 3,000 years in these words, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Every week, history comes alive here. Don't miss the next story.